حبوبي بالوصال نعم علي وجد.
So this discussion centers on words that carry multiple meanings within the same language, and how words can come to mean different things over time, and how that change in meaning can cause huge problems in our understanding of not just language but reality. Now, an important feature of, or an important preface I should say, to this discussion is to make clear that it's not words that have meanings, because when we speak we often say, well, what does that word mean? That's just the way we talk. It's not words that have meaning, it's the exact opposite to that. We have meanings to which we assign sounds, which then become words. So for example, if we take the word chair, it's a concrete object in reality that we can see it there, and then we assign the sound chair. I mean, if someone spoke a language other than English and they heard the word chair, it's just a sound to them, it doesn't mean anything. Likewise, whatever the word for chair is in Japanese, I don't know, but if they said it, I wouldn't know, it's just a sound. That when we associate a sound with an object such as a chair, the sound chair doesn't intrinsically convey the idea of the physical chair. Because if it did, then everyone should be able to understand as soon as I utter this, the sound comes from my mouth, chair, it should elicit an image in your mind of a chair, but it doesn't. There's no relation in this sense between the object and the sound. The sound is assigned by us, given by us, and then we come to recognize the sound as signifying the object, in this sense the chair. And likewise we can say the same thing about all other physical objects. We have beautiful trees around us, concrete objects in reality, and to this concrete object we assign the sound tree, and the sound then becomes a word. So whenever I say tree and you speak the same language as me, you'll understand I'm referring to an idea that you also understand because you understand the same language. But then we also have abstract concepts, not concrete objects like chairs and trees. Let's say justice. Now whatever justice may mean, we can just say the quality of being fair and reasonable, just for argument's sake. We do the same thing, that once we come to this understanding that, look, we want to assign some shorthand way of conveying something to each other about this idea of justice, which is being fair and reasonable. So we come up with this sound that we call justice. And this sound justice, then whenever I say it, whenever it comes from me, in your mind, it now conveys the meaning. It's actually it's a miracle that we can do this. Because sounds shouldn't, we hear all sorts of sounds all the time, all around us, but we never stop to think, oh, the train going past, or the wind blowing in the trees, or the birds singing, or whatever it may be. We don't stop to think that, does that mean anything to us? Because we're not part of the language group of trains or tornadoes or birds. But the fact that we can do it amongst ourselves, such that it's this highly complex phenomenon of conveying ideas from one soul to another soul. It's remarkable, not just the fact that we can do it, but at the level of complexity at which we can do it. And not just the level of complexity at which we can do it, but the fact that we can do it in so many different languages. It's incredible. Allah could have chosen that He made just one language. He didn't. In fact, Allah tells us that in the fact that He's given us different languages is a sign for those who truly reflect. So, when we identify meanings with specific sounds, which then become words in language, what we are essentially doing is that we're attaching very specific significations to them. Tree, the sound means the object, etc. And so every time that I use a word in a given language, those that use the language will understand something very specific by it. When I say tree, you're not going to understand chair. When I say chair, you're not going to understand sofa. You're going to understand something very specific by it. And hopefully, if you understand language well enough, even abstract concepts should mean something to us. So if we said things, we introduce concepts, abstract ideas, virtues, valor, and courage. Do we really know what they mean? But let's just say we do. They should evoke in our mind a certain sense and no other. Now, how about if someone starts changing the meanings of words? Something that had a specific meaning is now being used to convey either an entirely different meaning, which sometimes is better because you can separate between the two, or a slightly nuanced meaning that still has some semblance to the meaning that was originally intended. So when we hear the word now, our mind's not going to one place, it's going to more than one place. It just depends how far away we're moving from the original signification. But it gets slightly more subtle than that. Say the original meaning of a word, at least at a social level, gets quite subtle. Say that the original meaning of a word signifies something beautiful. Not beautiful as in someone who's beautiful to look at, like my brother Abdullah. That's a type of beauty, and something that beautiful in language. That the original meaning of a word signifies something beautiful, but it's then used with a slightly different meaning, which isn't beautiful. Could even be wrong. How will that change in signification affect our understanding of and relationship with the original word? Because we still have the original word in our mind, but now we have a different sense of that word. An easy example, there's many examples, and I'm sure you can come up with those examples. But the reason why I want to use this is because it's something which we can probably relate to in some way. That if we were to say, 30 years ago, for example, what did the word Islam mean in English when it was used? Had a very specific meaning. I don't know what it was, but let's just say it meant something like the religion that believes in the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ as the final prophet in a succession of prophets sent by God, and believes in the Quran as a final book sent by God, or something to that effect. So, you opened up, let's say you were interested in Islam 30 years ago, in the 80s, 90s, and prior to that, that's what you'll find. It's a nice meaning. It's not going to elicit anything apart from a sense of maybe curiosity. Oh, how does that relate to other religions? This is a really interesting idea. I've never heard that before. But how about if we ask the same thing now about Islam today? How will the word be understood? Post 9/11. Right? The word stays the same. If you look in a dictionary, it's the same. But the extension that we've now attached to that word has changed. And any time that someone says that or articulates that word, we have a slight disconnect between what the word is meant to convey and what it now has come to convey. And this is partly the Imam's concern. That when words that have a beautiful primary meaning in a given language are taken over and given new meanings, which can then cause confusion and conflation. And his worry is that if this happens, we're not just ceding linguistic ground, we're not giving away linguistic ground. It's no big deal, no problem, if this happens. It's not that. What's happening is that we're by giving up linguistic ground, we're actually giving up frames of reality. How? Because what we are saying essentially is that the signification of a word no longer carries any certain meaning. And when that happens, it's going to affect the way that we actually perceive things now. It's not just an innocent thing. We have a word, means something, over time it comes to mean something else. No big deal. We can still look up in a dictionary, whatever that is nowadays. If we're not careful, it's going to distort how we actually interact and relate to the world outside us. So taking the Imam's point, we can see that his concern is built on this idea that there's an inseparable relationship between language and reality. And his discussion relates to words within the same language. There's a set of words that he's going to present to us and tell us that, look, these words meant something very specific to the Salaf. And they've now come to signify something entirely different. But as well as applying two words within the same language, this idea applies even more so when we attempt to convey terms and concepts from one language to another language. The Imam is going to tell us how the word fiqh, for instance, meant one thing in the time of the Salaf and has now come to mean something else within the same language. If we make the step beyond that and say, how about conveying something from one language to another language? When we attempt to translate terms and concepts from one language to another language, what we mustn't forget is that each of the two languages, the language from which we're translating and the language into which it's being translated, that each of the two languages has a semantic history that has built up over decades and centuries. It's not just a case that you just pick a word and the word somehow stands in relationship to our desire to use it independently of the context that it's historically been used in the second language. Any given term in any language, what it's essentially doing over the course of its history is that it's sponged up the context and it's acquired unsaid additions to it. They might not be in a dictionary, but it's acquired those unsaid additions. So for instance, if you look at how dictionaries historically were compiled, take the great Oxford Dictionary of English, not the small one in 2 volumes, but the fuller one, which is in 27 volumes. When that dictionary was originally compiled, they tried to trace the meanings of words to the earliest usage of words in the English language. And so they take it by century. What did the word justice mean in the 15th century, and what are the proofs for that? And in the 16th century, and the 17th century, and the 18th century. That's why it's in 27 volumes. What we now find with the dictionary that we have on our desk is just the meaning of that word as it's used today, without any regard for how that word came to mean what it did and historical iterations of that word. It's not always been the same throughout its history. And so any given language has this phenomenon. Words acquire their context. They sponge it up. So if you look at the English language, we'll find that these words, they won't always be in a dictionary, the fuller meanings that have been sponged up. And so when we engage in translation, how confident can we then be that what we're trying to convey is the exact same idea that exists in the object language, let's say Arabic, the language from which we want to translate, into the target language, let's say English. So for instance, let's say we want to translate deep, core, central concepts from our tradition in Arabic, such as Iman. How would we be able to even render that into English? Is it really faith? Is it really belief? Or is it something else? Because in choosing any word, what we need to understand is that how does the word faith live in the English language? How does the word belief live in the English language? And does it correspond to the word Iman in our tradition? And maybe on deeper study we'll realize, yeah, maybe it doesn't. What this word faith has sponged up over the centuries actually means something entirely different. Take the word ihsan. نحن بصدده. That's what we're doing right now. Tasawwuf. I've never seen a translation for this word. I don't even know what to say. Every time I try to explain, to convey it in a word, there's no word in English language for me. You can only explain what it means. Take the word taqwa. We often translate it as God consciousness. What is God consciousness? What we've done, we've taken a word from our tradition, which we don't know, and put it into a language, in an expression, the meaning of which we also don't know. What does God consciousness actually mean? And can it mean taqwa? Let's take a slightly more simpler concept, sabr. We might say it's really easy. We can say sabr is patience, no problem. That's, we don't have to worry about that. But in fact, if we look at just something as simple as sabr, the ulama, they tell us that sabr is it's not actually a term that's used for any one act of what we can maybe term patience. Sabr is the overarching word that's given to various contexts in which sabr is shown. So for instance, in Arabic, each of these words has its own word. Each of these scenarios has its own word. For example, someone who refrains from their lowly desires. They say about that person that they're afif. They have iffa. The ulama say that's no' min as-sabr. Why? Because you're batting away your lowly desires. You're bearing patiently from what your lower self is calling to and restraining. That's called iffa. And then if you have sabr in the face of financial difficulties, it has a specific word. Sabr in the face of the enemy, it has a specific word. And all of those words combined are given the overall label sabr. Now if we say patience in English, what does it mean? Can it convey those ideas in the same way? Now, what's really interesting about Arabic, we can take it a step further here. Because we can see, sabr, does it mean patience? Taqwa, does it mean God consciousness? So right now what we're doing is we're looking at words singularly. But Arabic is a language which structurally is distinct from English. It works according to a root structure, which is markedly different from English. Now, why would that be important? Because in Arabic, not only does a term or a concept reflect its context and all these unsaid additions, but in Arabic, a word or a term or a concept also conveys various ideas that relate to the other in reality and that are reflected in a root structure. So what you do is you build up this web of meaning. So for instance, if you take the same word sabr, it has 3 root letters, the sad, the ba and the ra. And the ulama of language, they looked at this phenomenon and they recognized that there seems to be something in core about this combination of letters that indicates a relationship with other associated ideas in the language. So for instance, sabr, if you take the same 3 root letters, it gives you basar, which means to see, either with your eyes or with an inward eye. So what would then the relationship be between the idea of sabr, loosely right now rendered as patience, and the ability to see? Well, the idea is clear. Someone that's exhibiting patience is the one that sees. But not sees with their eyes, because if you did, you probably wouldn't have patience. But sees with something which is an inner eye. Or if we take the word, this is really interesting. I was once on the boats that go over the Bosphorus, and they were reading the Hizb al-Bahr. And when you go to a majlis, Shaykh Abbas knows this, and when you're expected to say something, you prepare something, right? So I was unprepared. And someone said, please could you say a few words? I said, oh my God. So it just came to me in that moment that Hizb al-Bahr of al-Imam al-Ghazali, and it's very apt because we were on the Bahr, that the word Bahr in Arabic is itself giving us the meaning of what it actually does, the Bahr, the ocean. Because when you take the 3 root letters, the ba and the ha and the ra, and you just switch around the positions of those 3 letters, you get 2 further words, rahib or harb. Rahib is marhaba, welcome, and harb is war, go away. That's the nature of the ocean. If you tread on it with respect, it will welcome you. But if you ride it with arrogance, it will show you its might, and it will give you the war that you don't want. It's so incredible how language in the Arabic language conveys these ideas as webs. Now, how can we convey those webs of ideas into English? It's difficult. So not only has the task of translation become at a primary level difficult between any language, the complexity of translation acquires further complex layers when we have languages such as Arabic with these root structures and complex web of meanings, and we want to convey it to a language that doesn't have that. How hard is that? And likewise is the case when we tend to do it the other way, when we want to convey ideas from English into Arabic. And why is that important? Because English is now a language that is used to speak about things in our deen. So just this morning someone was asking me something, and this is more of like an ilmi discussion. They said, what does a tradition say about consciousness? And I said, I don't know. Because I don't know what consciousness means in our tradition. What's the word for consciousness in our tradition? Why am I using this example? It's not that someone knows or doesn't know. The point that I'm trying to make is that sometimes what we do is we have ideas and concepts and terminology, because for most of us, if not all of us, English is our mother language. We haven't come from Arabic into English. We've gone from English into Arabic, and what we tend to do is take the concepts that we've become familiar with, and we've tried to understand our deen through those concepts. We read the books of theology in English, and we try to carry those ideas over into Arabic. And I hear many theological examples being discussed amongst people, and the first thing that comes to my mind is, what is that idea in our tradition? Does it even have a correspondence, or is it a very peculiarly Christian idea that's discussed in a very Christian context? We may not even have that. So we use all these terms without paying any attention or regard to the fact that just as we can't do it from Arabic into English that easily, why are we doing it from English into Arabic? In fact, it's a step worse, because we're not even attempting to translate it into English. We're just focusing on what the English is, and we're at the same time claiming to speak about our tradition without paying any regard to what it may actually mean in our own tradition, in our languages. It's a step worse. And the reason why this is so crucial to us as a community of English speakers is that if we want to find some sense of civilizational rootedness in English-speaking lands, we need to appropriate and own this language. We need to be able to produce literature at the highest level that's reflective of who we are. We need to be able to produce songs and poetry that is found in all the languages of Islam. If you look at the languages of Islam, I mean, the Turkish and Persian and Urdu and Malay, hundreds of languages. Firstly, it's the case that we find in those languages high levels of literature, high levels of poetry, high levels of song. Just last night we heard beautiful qasaid in Arabic, but we had a qasida in Urdu, in Persian. Now, for those of us who are from a subcontinent background, how much did that affect us? Right? Because we have some lived connection with that language based on the centuries-old blood that flows through our veins. It evokes some ancient history in us, some ancient memories in us, some connection to us. And tabarakallah that we can connect, right? We have to do the same thing in English, so that tomorrow when our grandchildren listen to it, because it's possible that they won't even know our languages. They may just speak English. Do we not want them to feel what we feel in our languages? The only way that we can do that is by creating those frames that we have in our historical languages of Islam. What's interesting about these languages is that they didn't offer translations, by the way. What's sabr in Urdu? Sabr. What's shukr in Urdu? Shukr. It's the same thing in all other languages of Islam. Why? Because they understood that it's not about conveying an idea, not to negate that there are certain words, of course, I'm not saying that there's not. But mostly what we'll find is that the deep core conceptual meanings of who we are and how we're represented were just carried over. Why do we not do that in English? It's almost as we have this complex that no, English is the Queen's language, or now the King's, and we have to oblige by offering some token that represents what we're trying to convey. I'm not saying that's wrong, by the way. It's quite possible someone can do that. I'm not saying that's wrong. But at least we have to think about how we're going to do this. And this point also is applicable to what the Imam is saying insofar as the Islamic disciplines are concerned, when we translate technical terms from our ʿUlum tradition. So for instance, there are certain disciplines that only exist in Islam. An example? Hadith. There's no parallel to that in any other civilization. So why do we want to translate Sahih as ma adri aish yani? Is it rigorously authenticated, sound, well attested to? All of these are arbitrary. Not one person's translation is no stronger than the others. at the very least, we should keep these ideas as they are. We shouldn't feel compelled. I'll tell you why. Because it does create problems when we then tend to, within the subject of Mustalah al-Hadith, which is interestingly called the technical nomenclature of Hadith, gives it away in its very, the words in Arabic, right? That when we have a word such as a concept such as da'if, and we're running around saying it's a weak hadith, it's not weak. Weak is the reason in Arabic it's called da'if, it's a legal category that helps serve a legal function, that's it. It's not weak in the sense of, just put it to the side, you can't. None of the ulama of Ahlul Islam, nobody ever said that a weak hadith is to be disregarded, ever. But the reason why we see it as such sometimes, not saying it's a phenomenon, alhamdulillah, it used to be, alhamdulillah, it's not that as much anymore, it's because we imposed upon it a translation which didn't accord to what it meant in Arabic. So this is sort of just a preamble to the concerns that the Imam is really trying to put forward in the use of language. Because if you look at the words that the Imam discusses, al-fiqh, al-ilm, al-tawheed, al-tadhkir, and Shaykh Abbas mentioned earlier, al-hikmah. He says these 5 words have now, in his time, and some of them even in our time, they've taken on meanings that are far removed from the meanings that they carried in the time of the Salaf. And so, the first word that the Imam gives us or wants to speak about is al-fiqh, and I'm not going to go through all of them because what's said of one will be enough to go through all of them. These are all words that relate to the Imam's project in the Ihya, which is ilm tariq al-akhirah. We spoke yesterday about ilm tariq al-akhirah. What does kitab al-ilm mean? What does Ihya ʿUlum ad-din mean? When the Imam says ʿUlum ad-din, which ʿUlum are they? We said they're not the formal sciences, because the formal sciences were in no need of revival. They were highly developed by the time of Imam. He himself was a master at those. He's speaking about the inward sciences that needed revival. And so the term that he starts with is fiqh. Now, it's important to always keep in mind that the Imam is not speaking as an outsider, he's speaking as a master faqih, second only to al-Imam al-Shafi'i in his school. And he says that, yes, fiqh does mean law, which is a correct deployment of the term. But the way it had come to be used in his time is that if anyone said fiqh, it came to signify inessential legal technicalities or trivialities or fine-grained analysis of legal causes. And whoever was seen to be able to delve deeper at this molecular level of legal discussion was said to be afqah, i.e. the greater legal scholar. He says this is not how this term was understood historically. In the time of the Sahaba, the term fiqh was used in relation to what he says, ilm tariq al-akhirah, which was how we as individuals are supposed to deep dive into our souls to recognize how polluted they may have become. It's really interesting in Arabic how the Imam conveys this istibaq in balagha, where he says that those people who engage in legal trivialities, the way he expresses it, he says al-waquf ala daqa'iq al-ilal. And ilal are legal causes. And he's saying that you're just really delving into fine-grained analysis of legal causes. And he uses the same expression to describe the activity that we're meant to engage in relation to looking into our souls. He says it's ma'rifatu دقائق آفات النفس. Now why is that interesting? Because the first activity of the legal scholar is the deeper he dives into what he's doing, the more he's either inadvertently or consciously saying, look at how much I know. So look, only someone who has that much knowledge can get that detailed. But on the flip side, he's saying that the one who goes into the deeper dive of his soul, what's he saying? Look how much I don't know. Look how the meanings have completely gone to opposite ends. Fiqh meant something specific to the companions. And all the Imam is trying to say here is that it doesn't mean what people have now taken it to mean. For him, he says fiqh has the same meaning as the word fahm, which is understanding. And he gives us examples from the Quran, just in case someone's in any doubt. He says, Allah Azza wa Jal in the Quran says, بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم لهم قلوب لا يفقهون بها. That they have hearts that have no discernment. يفقهون بها. It's the same with fiqh. He's saying, it's not that they don't have fiqh because they've ignored legal rulings. He's saying they don't have fiqh because they've not thought about things deeply. Has nothing to do with law. There's a hadith, man yuridillahu bihi khayra yufaqihu fid din. Whomsoever Allah desires fiqh, whomsoever Allah desires good, He gives him fiqh. It's not knowledge of fatwa or knowledge of legal rulings. No, He gives them an understanding of the deen. And for this, the Imam has coined that term that Shaykh Yahya, Allah Yahfadhu, has been speaking about, which to coin this term, ilm tariq al-akhirah, you had to be an usuli, a legal theorist of the highest order. You had to be a mutakallim, a theologian of the highest order. You had to be a faqih, a legal scholar of the highest order. Imam Ghazali, Shamil, Kamil. Because he understands exactly what's in front of him, he can say all of this. Prior to Imam Ghazali, we had Qut al-Qulub, it had Qubul in the Ummah, a book which if you look at it, it's very similar to the Ihya. But it doesn't have that same, not that it's not accepted, it is, but it's not the same as the Ihya. Why? Because we're speaking about someone who's a master logician, legal theorist, legal scholar, theologian. But he's also a master of spiritual states. And that's why he's able to put together this idea of how us at a primary call, as we spoke about yesterday, when we say ilm, which is the next word, the only type of knowledge that should come to our mind is knowledge of Allah. He doesn't call his book Kitabul Ilm Billahi Ta'ala wa Sifatihi wa la. He says Kitabul Ilm. As we said, when you say Abdullah amongst the companions, who does it mean? Abdullah bin Mas'ud. There's so many abadillah amongst the companions, but when you say Qala Abdullah, it means Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu, nobody else. The Imam is saying the same thing. When you say Kitabul Ilm, the only thing that you should understand by that is knowledge of Allah and anything that draws you closer to Allah. Doesn't need to add any conditions or additions or adjectives or just, no. Because why? If we're going to use the word ilm, that's the only thing it should mean, and it's the other forms of knowledge that need to stipulate what they mean when they use the word knowledge. So this second term then, which is ilm, in the Imam's time he said that it again relates to the first one, that the faqih is the only one that's producing ilm. The legal scholar is the only one that's producing knowledge. The one that's engaging or who occupies himself in the minutiae of fiqh rulings. Or anyone, he goes as far as saying that anyone that doesn't engage in this specific type of study in his time is not considered alim. And his response is, what about the companions? Are they not ulama billah? إنما يخشى الله min ibadihi al-ulama, not fuqaha, doesn't mean that. It means those who have knowledge of Allah. What did, again, Sayyidina Abdullah bin Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu, when he said at the passing of Sayyidina Umar, Mata tis'atu a'shar al-ilm. 9/10 of all knowledge have passed away today. And what did the companion say? How can you say that when there remains amongst us Sayyidina Ali and Sayyidina Uthman and Talha and Zubair? Like the kibar of the Sahaba are still alive. He said, I'm not talking about legal rulings. He actually says that. He said, it's not about fatwa. I'm speaking about knowledge of Allah. At the passing of Sayyidina Umar, 9/10 of the knowledge of Allah disappeared from this world. So when they used the word ilm, they used it with a meaning that signifies knowledge of Allah and nothing else. And the third and the last term which I'm going to use, just speak about this, there's another two after that, which is tawheed. And in the Imam's time, again, he's a mutakallim. That this word tawheed came to mean either, he uses the word kalam, which again, it's dialectical theology, philosophical theology, depending on which particular type of kalam you're looking at. Doesn't matter. It's a type of discussion about Allah and His attributes and those things which relate to that. It's called kalam. And this included the art of debate, definitely up to the time of Imam Ghazali. And the manner in which to pick holes in an opponent's argument, to employ detailed and convoluted arguments. And the Imam tells us later in the book that whoever becomes accustomed to the ways of debate, his mind will always be used to the dictates of the science of debate, i.e., everything needs to be critiqued. Everything needs to be debated. The other person doesn't really know what they're thinking, what they're talking about. They've not really been trained in this thing. They don't know the parameters of this science. They haven't understood the architectonic of knowledge. No, that's how it. Because why? You think that you just know more than everyone else. This person's reasoning is weak. And what the Imam says is that this is not only a lack of mercy in one's heart, but ultimately it's a sign of poor character. To think that way about someone else. Just because you have a form of knowledge and a form of understanding that other people don't have. The adab of that is what? That if Allah has blessed someone with a deep understanding of deen, the fiqh of that ilm is to know when to deploy it and to how and to whom and when. That's it. In all other times you remain silent and you have a brotherly loving opinion of every human being. Your ilm doesn't concern. If you're sitting in a majlis and no one's a student of knowledge, it's like you don't have any ilm. You're there as a loving component of this gathering. But if you're sitting there thinking, I'm the one that people are going to come to ask the question, it's very subtle, it's very subconscious. I'm not saying that someone sits there and does that, they do it subconsciously. Especially when we get in gatherings like this and there's one person sitting at the front. To bat that away from you is not an easy thing to do. You have to consciously do that. And so this is what the Imam is saying, that the word tawheed had come to be employed in this particular way. But what's really fascinating about the Imam's understanding of how the Quran convinces us of what its message is that he says that it contains clear proofs which are exactly suited to the natural cognitive state of a human being. You don't have to have any training in any of the rational disciplines. None. Allah is using types of proof that stand in the balance of a natural state of a human being. These are types of arguments and proofs that are accepted by everyone when they hear them. But he says that during the time of the Salaf, Tawheed meant something else. He says that it meant the understanding that everything is from Allah. It meant that there are no causes in the world. Not from a theological perspective, just that it's this everything around us. And this is, why is this important? Because he goes on to say that when you see that, it has a palpable effect on your life, because you'll stop complaining about things. You know it's all from Allah, and it's happening for a reason, because that's what He wants. And the most beautiful example that he gives here is when the Siddiq of this ummah, Sayyidina Abu Bakr, radiyallahu anhu, when he fell ill, and what did they say to him? Shall we send for a doctor? And what did he say? Amradani at-tabib. It's a doctor that's caused my illness. In fact, there's another narration about this, and someone says to him that, what did the doctor say about your illness? I mean, if you've seen the doctor, what did the doctor say about your illness? And he said, Inni fa'alun lima yurid. I do as I wish. He was just, the qada of Allah was flowing in him. It didn't matter. Radin anhu. That's what Tawheed meant to these people. It didn't mean all these technical aspects of the sciences that we now come to know of it. There are a couple of other words that the Imam mentions, at-tadhkir and al-hikmah. But he says very similar things about them insofar as they've come to be used in a certain way, whereas in the time of the Salaf they were used with markedly different meanings. But I just want to end on this note here. Just as the Imam is telling us that there are words that are beautiful words, that every human being should, can and must have access to and understand, and should inform the way they look at the world, but now they've been moved away from their meanings to give us another meaning, we can ask ourselves the same question today. Do we have words in our midst today that are beautiful words, but have now come to mean something else? And one word that actually just really comes to my mind immediately, amongst, I'm sure, a whole host of words, is truth. Historically, truth in one sense just means when something I say corresponds with how something actually is. If I say there's a tree outside and there actually is a tree outside, that means it's true. If I say this is a sofa and is a sofa, it means it's true. It's a correspondence. But now, truth has come to mean whatever I think it is. That's what the truth is. And so, this change in meaning, that if we've given up this linguistic ground, it's coming right full circle now, if we are willing to give up this linguistic ground in relation to words that we can now see, such as truth, and I'm sure there's many, many other words, we're not just giving up a linguistic ground. We're giving up an intrinsic frame of reality. And so what the Imam is saying is, it's not a restoration of meanings to words, it's actually a restoration of our sense of what actually is. Because without it, we won't be anything. So inshallah we'll stop here.
وجد بالنوال منه إليّ